They thought Canada would stay quiet, but Carney just proved the world was dead wrong. Carney's talk at the Council on Foreign Relations wasn't just another policy address. It was a statement of confidence, humor, and quiet defiance.
We are a leading developer of AI, and our research universities are some of the biggest producers in volume of AI, computing, and quantum talent in the world. Unfortunately, most of them go to the United States. I understand you're changing your visa policy here, so you're going to hang on to a few of those.
He reminded Americans that Trump's trade war, far from weakening Canada, only made it stronger. He showed with numbers that Canada is now doubling defense spending, powering allies with hydro exports worth $5.8 billion, and commanding 40% of the world's mining firms. He proved with facts that Ottawa no longer needs to wait for Washington's permission. The applause in that New York hall was more than laughter at a Trump joke. It was recognition that Canada has stepped onto the global stage as an independent power. For Canadians, it was pride. For Americans, especially Trump's camp, it was a warning. And for the world, it was proof that Mark Carney is no longer just a national leader, but one of the most respected statesmen shaping the future order. Carney's tone was deliberate. He began by contrasting America's turn toward transactional, bilateral deals with Canada's embrace of multilateralism. He noted that 40% of the world's listed mining companies are headquartered in Canada, giving Ottawa leverage in a world hungry for critical minerals. He pointed out that Canada's universities are among the top global producers of AI and quantum talent. But here came the sting. Most of those graduates moved south.
Unfortunately, most of them go to the United
before
States.
adding, I understand you're changing your visa policy, so maybe we'll keep a few. The audience laughed. But business leaders in the room knew he was dead serious. The United States is bleeding talent, and Carney made sure to highlight it. A New York-based venture capitalist told Bloomberg after the event, "Carney hit the nail on the head. American policy is pushing the smartest people away. That's not sustainable." From there, Carney pivoted to what he called a rupture, not a transition. Trump's trade war, he argued, forced Canada to act fast, and Ottawa used the shock to diversify its economy. He laid out a three-pillar strategy: build strength at home, diversify abroad, and defend Canadian values. At home, Canada has slashed barriers to interprovincial trade, a move economists estimate could add up to $50 billion to GDP by 2030. He reminded the audience that Canada is doubling defense spending by 2030, a commitment worth over $70 billion. And he rolled out new investments in clean technology, with $12 billion earmarked for green hydrogen, EV battery plants, and AI-driven supply chain resilience. Chrystia Freeland underscored the same point earlier this month in Ottawa. The joke that brought the House down was also his sharpest rebuke. With a grin, Carney quipped that Donald Trump did more to bring Canada closer to Europe than any Canadian prime minister ever could. The laughter masked the gravity of the point. Tariffs meant to punish Canada had accelerated its pivot toward the EU. Within months of Trump's first tariff salvo in 2018, Ottawa signed the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and by mid-2025, bilateral trade between Canada and the EU had topped $100 billion. French President Emmanuel Macron praised Carney's strategy last week, saying, "Canada has become Europe's most reliable partner outside the Union." Meanwhile, small manufacturers in Quebec are already cashing in. Louis Tremblay, who runs a steel fabrication shop outside Montreal, said 2 years ago, 90% of my orders went to the US, now half go to Germany and France. Trump's tariffs forced us to grow faster in Europe than we ever imagined. On defense, Carney reminded Americans of facts that sting. Canada is the largest per capita contributor to Ukraine's defense, providing over $4.5 billion in aid since 2022. He cited cooperation with the Nordic-Baltic 8 on Arctic sovereignty, warning that if America retreats, Canada and Europe will fill the vacuum. "We are on track," he said firmly, to be a full member of the European defense arrangement. The statement earned nods from NATO officials present. Public opinion backs the shift. A September 2025 Nanos research poll found that 68% of Canadians now support higher defense spending, up from just 32% a decade ago. A retired Canadian Forces officer interviewed by CBC said, "Carney is telling Americans something they don't want to hear. If you pull back, We will move forward without you. Ordinary Canadians are noticing the shift as well. Small and medium-sized businesses that once depended on the U.S. market are diversifying abroad. Michelle Wong, owner of a Toronto-based AI startup, told reporters, "When Trump's tariffs made cross-border business uncertain, we looked to Berlin and Paris instead. Europe is hungry for Canadian innovation, and our exports have doubled in 2 years." According to Canada's Trade Ministry, SMEs using government export programs grew their overseas sales by 22% last year. This is more than numbers. It's a structural change in how Canadian companies see their future. Carney also detailed how energy and resource exports have been weaponized by U.S. politics, pushing Canada to diversify. 97% of Canadian oil exports still flow south, but the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline has shifted nearly 900,000 barrels per day toward Asia. Rebecca Schultz, Alberta's energy minister, noted in Tokyo this spring that Japan and South Korea now buy billions in Canadian LNG and crude. "We no longer live and die by U.S. demand." The numbers prove her point. Canadian energy exports to Asia grew by 27% year-over-year in 2024, reducing America's leverage. Analysts at the International Energy Agency estimate that by 2030, 1/3 of Canadian crude will bypass U.S. refiners entirely. Another key theme was values. Carney reminded the audience that Canada's pluralism, sustainability, and collaborative federalism are not weaknesses, but assets. He cited Toronto and Vancouver as two of the most diverse cities on Earth, arguing that societies which practice collaboration at home are better equipped to build coalitions abroad. He used data. 24% of Canada's population is foreign-born, compared to 14% in the United States. That diversity, he said, makes Canada more adaptable in a fragmented world. Angus Reid Institute polling from August showed 72% of Canadians agree that immigration strengthens the economy. By contrast, U.S. surveys show rising division. "Pluralism works," Carney said, to another round of applause. The speech was not all numbers. Carney repeatedly circled back to Trump's tariffs, framing them as a self-inflicted wound. "Tariffs backfired," he said bluntly. "American consumers bore the brunt, with studies showing that Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs raised U.S. prices by an average of 20%. They did little to revive domestic industry." Meanwhile, Canadian steel exports to Europe rose 14% in 2023. A Montreal steelworker named Jean-Claude Tremblay put it simply, "Trump tried to choke us." Instead, we found new customers. In Detroit, auto suppliers say the opposite story played out. Michael Harris, who runs a parts factory with 50 employees, told the Financial Times that tariffs just raised costs. "Canada kept selling, just not to us. My workers paid the price." Carney's message resonated beyond New York. In Ottawa, opposition leader Pierre Poilievre admitted, "Even if you dislike Carney's politics, you cannot deny he has put Canada in a stronger position globally, south of the border." Some Americans grudgingly agreed. A Michigan auto parts manufacturer told Bloomberg, "We were supposed to benefit from Trump's tariffs. Instead, we lost contracts while Canada grew new markets." These real-world consequences underscore Carney's argument. Trump's America first became America alone. Throughout his remarks, Carney deployed a rhetorical trick, lists of 3. He spoke of 3 reasons Canada can thrive, 3 actions Ottawa has taken, and 3 geographic strategies for the future. The repetition gave the talk rhythm. By the end, the audience could recite the themes themselves: strength at home, diversify abroad, defend values. The clarity stood in stark contrast to Trump's erratic midnight social media posts, which often sow confusion even among his allies. The international reaction was swift. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen tweeted within hours, praising Canada's resilience. In Mexico City, President Claudia Sheinbaum praised the deepening Canada-Mexico partnership, citing a new bilateral trade framework signed on September 20, 2025. And in Berlin, Chancellor Olaf Scholz remarked that Canada is no longer a junior partner. It is a pillar of the West. The Washington Post noted that the timing of Carney's remarks made the speech feel like a polite but pointed rejection of American dominance. Carney closed with facts meant to sting Washington's pride. Canada controls 40% of the world's mining companies, produces 15% of global uranium, and generates 62% of its electricity from renewable hydro. Last year alone, Canadian hydro exports to the U.S. generated $5.8 billion in revenue, powering states like New York and Michigan. "You don't play politics with electricity," Carney warned. The line recalled Trump's repeated threats to weaponize energy trade and the vulnerabilities it creates. A former New York state regulator told CBC, "If Canada flips the switch, we go dark." That's the reality. The applause at the end was not just polite. It was sustained, punctuated by whispers that Carney had cemented his role as a global statesman. For Canadians, the speech was a moment of pride. For Americans, especially Trump's allies, it was a warning that bullying your closest neighbor comes at a cost. And for the world, it was confirmation that Canada's Prime Minister is no longer just a national leader, but a central voice in shaping the future order. As of today, September 26, 2025, Canada's economy is projected to grow 2.1% this year despite global headwinds, while U.S. growth lags at 1.3%. Canadian defense spending is on track to reach 2% of GDP by 2030, satisfying NATO benchmarks. Exports to Asia are up double digits. European investment in Canadian critical minerals has surged, with a $3.7 billion deal signed this summer. Consumer confidence in Canada is at a 3-year high, while the University of Michigan Index shows U.S. confidence at a 15-year low. Inflation in the U.S. is running at 4.2%, compared to Canada's 2.7%. The facts back up Carney's message. Canada has built resilience, and it is paying off. The bigger picture is clear. Trump's America First policies isolated Washington, but Canada used them to accelerate partnerships that now stretch across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. In front of an American audience, Carney reminded the world that Canada is not a 51st state, not a subordinate, but a sovereign power capable of charting its own course. He did it with humor, data, and diplomacy, and by making Donald Trump the punchline.
Returning to Canada's trade war with the U.S. now, the Port of Churchill could soon be a very strategic asset.
President Trump's trade war is affecting America's ports. Container shipment bookings are down nearly 50% from a year ago.
Major drops in cargo at U.S. ports due to tariffs.
Forget oil, forget gas, forget tariffs. The new world war is about water. And on September 26, 2025, Donald Trump lit the fuse. From a podium in Washington, he stunned the world by demanding direct control of Canada's rivers and lakes, calling them essential for America's survival. His words were thundered as a public ultimatum. But Ottawa didn't bow. Prime Minister Mark Carney fired back with a blunt rejection, declaring that Canada's sovereignty was not for sale. That single clash set off a chain reaction. For farmers in California's Central Valley, it meant canals running dry and fields withering. For chip makers in Arizona, it meant production lines suddenly rationing water. And for millions of families already crushed by inflation, it meant grocery bills climbing even higher. Trump framed it as strength. Canada's refusal exposed it as weakness. The fight over water had officially begun, and its consequences reach every household in America. The Port of Churchill in Manitoba, once a sleepy northern hub, suddenly became a lightning rod. Trump insisted that without Canadian access, America's supply chains would bleed out. His allies in Congress framed the demand as national security, but Ottawa pushed back with rare defiance. Prime Minister Carney, who had built his reputation in financial halls rather than political battles, said bluntly, "Canada is not for sale. Our rivers and lakes are not commodities." That statement set social media ablaze. Within hours, over 80 advocacy groups, from indigenous communities in British Columbia to environmental NGOs in Quebec, issued a joint declaration: "Water is sovereignty. We will not yield." The reaction on the ground in the United States was immediate and raw. In California's Central Valley, where nearly 40% of vegetables are grown and 66% of its fruits and nuts are produced, farmers had been promised relief from Canadian water diversions. "We were told shipments were coming," said Jorge Martinez, a third-generation tomato grower near Fresno. "Now they say nothing is coming. My fields are drying. If I lose this harvest, my family business goes under." Data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture released this week shows California's crop yields down 12% year-on-year, the sharpest decline since the droughts of 2012. Supermarket chains are already warning that lettuce prices could jump 20% by Christmas. Small businesses are also paying the price. In Nevada, local food processors are cutting shifts. "I've already laid off 15 workers," said Amy Chen, owner of Silver State Produce in Reno. "If water allocations shrink again, I'll close entirely." It's not China hurting us, it's this fight with Canada. Her story is echoed across the West, where SMEs form the backbone of local economies. 47% of small firms list water access as their #1 threat. Economists are sounding the alarm as well. Goldman Sachs issued a research note on September 20th, warning that Canada's refusal to share water could shave 0.6% off US GDP in 2025. That translates to roughly $130 billion in lost output, concentrated in agriculture, semiconductors, and steel production. This is not symbolic. The report stated, water is now a strategic resource like oil once was. Without reliable access, entire sectors of the U.S. economy face structural risk. The industrial heartland of America was the next to feel the shock. In Arizona's booming semiconductor corridor, multi-billion-dollar fabrication plants consume tens of millions of gallons weekly. They suddenly faced an uncertain future. Intel's new $20 billion facility near Chandler, built with the promise of stable water flows, now runs at reduced capacity. An internal memo leaked on September 18th revealed that the company is rationing production, with executives admitting privately that Canadian refusal has become the single greatest threat to U.S. chip supply. Industry analysts warn that global electronics prices could spike within months as American fabs fall short of demand. The ripple effect spread quickly into steel and auto manufacturing. Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, states Trump once promised to revive, were hit by the cruel irony of idled assembly lines. We can't weld without water. We can't cool furnaces without it, said union leader Dave Reynolds from Cleveland Steelworks, where 1,200 workers were sent home without pay last week. The UAW reported that layoffs linked to water shortages have already affected over 25,000 workers across the Midwest. For families still recovering from pandemic-era job cuts, the blow was devastating and deeply personal. Hydroelectric plants in the Pacific Northwest faced their own nightmare. With reservoirs at record lows, utilities had quietly hoped Canadian reserves would bail them out. When Ottawa slammed the door, companies scrambled to reactivate coal and natural gas plants mothballed years ago. The Bonneville Power Administration announced on September 22nd that residential bills could rise by 18%. We're burning through coal like it's 1975, one energy executive admitted. Years of clean energy progress just went up in smoke. The political optics were damning. Trump had framed Canadian water as the key to national revival, promising that rivers would fuel both crops and industry. Instead, his demand backfired spectacularly, exposing American vulnerability. In Ottawa, Carney's approval rating jumped to 61%, the highest for any Canadian leader in 2 decades. South of the border, polls from the Pew Research Center show that only 39% of Americans now believe Trump's trade strategy is helping ordinary people, down from 52% in March. Ordinary citizens are voicing frustration. In Detroit, retired teacher Maria Lopez described her shock when her water bill doubled in just 6 months. We're paying more, getting less, and being told to blame Canada. She said, but maybe the problem is in Washington, not Ottawa. Farmers too are mobilizing. The California Farm Bureau filed a petition in federal court accusing reckless policy. Their filing cites USDA data showing that vegetable imports from Mexico surged 30% this summer, filling gaps left by California's dried-out fields. Ironically, the tariffs that sparked the Canada fight are now forcing Americans to depend even more on Mexican produce. Meanwhile, the global dimension of this crisis is impossible to ignore. European policymakers, weary of repeated droughts in Spain, Italy, and Greece, are now openly discussing Canadian freshwater as part of their long-term survival strategy. A leaked EU Commission draft dated September 12th describes Canada as a potential stabilizer for southern European agriculture and calls for exploratory talks on water-sharing agreements. Brussels has bypassed Washington entirely. China, too, has entered the picture. According to a September report by the Financial Times, at least 3 major Chinese conglomerates have approached Canadian provincial governments with offers of billions in investment for water infrastructure in exchange for future access rights. Beijing, already securing cobalt in the Congo and oil in Central Asia, now sees water as the next frontier. We have to look beyond Africa, said Li Jun, CEO of Sinohydro, in an interview with state media. Canada represents the world's most secure freshwater reserves. For Washington, this is a nightmare scenario. Not only has Canada refused Trump's demand, but global rivals are now positioning themselves to benefit. U.S. allies are quietly hedging as well. On September 19th, French President Emmanuel Macron told reporters in Paris that Canada has proven itself a responsible steward of global resources. It was a thinly veiled jab at Trump's aggressive tactics. In Berlin, Chancellor Olaf Scholz went further, warning that turning water into a bargaining chip undermines decades of cooperation. The Great Lakes, home to 40 million people and anchoring hundreds of billions of dollars in cross-border commerce, add yet another layer of tension. Trump's suggestion that long-standing water quality agreements could be scrapped sent shockwaves through Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. "If this treaty falls, we lose trust overnight," said Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago. "Our people drink from these lakes. You don't play politics with drinking water." The Chicago Tribune reported panic buying of bottled water surged 22% in Illinois. Financial markets have already priced in the turmoil. Agricultural stocks have dropped 8% since early September, while semiconductor and energy shares are experiencing record volatility. The S&P Global Water Index, a benchmark tracking companies involved in water technology, jumped 14% in 2 weeks as investors scrambled for safe havens. Morgan Stanley analysts now warn that water security is becoming the defining risk factor of the decade. History offers a chilling reminder of what happens when resources once taken for granted suddenly become weapons. In the 1970s, the world assumed oil would always be cheap and plentiful until OPEC's embargo shattered that illusion. It tripled prices and redrew global alliances overnight. Today, water is emerging as the 21st century's oil, and Canada has just shown that it holds the spigot. Prime Minister Mark Carney's refusal to bend was not just a defense of sovereignty. It was a declaration that Canada now controls the single most valuable resource in the modern world. That message reverberated across continents. In Asia, where droughts are crippling India's farmlands and China's northern cities, governments are recalculating strategies. Beijing has already begun exploring Canadian partnerships, while Tokyo and Seoul have quietly inquired about long-term supply contracts tied to agricultural exports. According to Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, water scarcity has cut rice yields by 9% this year. It is the sharpest fall since 1993. Canadian access could offset those losses, but only if Ottawa chooses to share. For the United States, the realization is devastating. Its northern neighbor, once seen as a reliable backup, is now charting an independent course. Even within North America, the political fallout is enormous. By suspending renewal of the Columbia River Treaty, Trump didn't just disrupt a 1961 pact that balanced flood control and hydroelectric benefits, he signaled to the world that even the most stable agreements can collapse under pressure. If a 60-year-old treaty can be torn up overnight, what confidence can we have in anything America signs, asked former Canadian ambassador to Washington, David McNaughton. In a CBC interview last week, the uncertainty alone has already scared away investors from cross-border infrastructure projects valued at over $12 billion. Meanwhile, the Great Lakes stand as both symbol and warning, supporting 40 million people. Their waters anchor industries from shipping to steel. Trump's hints at destabilizing joint protections has alarmed not only mayors in U.S. lake cities, but also investors in Europe, who fear that even North America's most dependable freshwater system could become a bargaining chip. Already, bottled water sales in Michigan and Ohio have jumped 17% this month, reflecting public anxiety. Economists warn that the psychological impact of such instability, families hoarding supplies and companies delaying investments, can be as damaging as the physical shortages themselves. For America, the harsh truth is becoming unavoidable. By 2030, large portions of the western United States could be locked in unrelenting drought. Without Canadian cooperation, survival will depend on costly desalination plants, sweeping conservation programs, and technologies that are still years away from scaling. The tools exist, but the question remains, will they come fast enough? And will Americans bear the price?